everybody, Caleb here, and today we've got something a little different, but quite familiar. I've got this Rogue mandolin here. This is a really cheap mandolin, but this is probably most people's first foray into mandolin. This is actually mine. So this is my first mandolin right here. This is what I learned to play mandolin on. I'm not by any means a really good mandolin player, but I can make some chords and make some noise. But I thought we'd do kind of a quick setup today. This thing is not set up well at all. It needs some real big help. It's actually got quite a few issues. The action is too low as it sits, but since that's an easy thing to do on a mandolin, I thought we'd kind of go over that. Just a few things to make this really cheap mandolin play a little bit better. Because mandolins are one of those things where it's really kind of hard to get into because they're either really cheap or they have a big jump to fairly expensive. So, you almost have to start off on the cheapest there is so you can start to learn on it and make sure that you're going to learn on it. So I thought we'd just do a couple of tips and tricks to help get it set up playing a little bit better. So I'll go ahead and set her down and we can get started on it. Like I said, this was my very first mandolin. Right now, this is actually my only mandolin, and I've played this for several years, but it's never really been set up quite right. And with these cheaper mandolins, you're pretty much going to have that problem 90% of the time. So I thought, we'll just go through today and try and get this thing in a little bit better shape, address all the issues that I have with it, and make sure it's looking good. There are some things we're going to want to loosen the strings on this for, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I am not going to replace the strings on this. With mandolins, as opposed to guitars, if you don't have to replace the strings, you kind of don't want to. Because of how harsh mandolins can be in the higher register, the older strings help mellow that out quite a bit. So you really don't want to be replacing the strings super often unless you think you're going to have a problem or you do have a problem. But seeing as these strings are working fine for me and holding tune fine for me, I'm not going to replace them. I'm just going to loosen them and move them to the side. Now, if we break one, I do have extra strings, so I can replace them. But the goal will be to not need to. Now, if your mandolin was intonated super perfectly or actually just really close, you may want to have kept track of where your bridge is before you started detuning. This mandolin is not intonated very well at all. So I'm going to have to adjust this bridge placement once we get this thing tuned back up. So I'm not going to bother keeping track of where it was. I got some, old marks so you can see where it sat so I can get pretty close. But for now, I'm just going to take that out of there. So we can start looking at the fingerboard now. So now what I'll be doing is doing a thorough inspection on this fingerboard. And, the point of this video was to show some things maybe you could do to your cheaper instruments to make sure that they're in a playable state. Because for most instruments like this, it would cost more than this instrument is worth to have someone who knows what they're doing look at it. So there's some simple things you can do to make sure that it's good. And the first thing I'm going to do now that the strings are off is make sure that the frets are level. And if I were trying to explain to someone with little to no experience working on these how to do this, this is how I would do it. I was actually sent one of these fret rockers. These are not super expensive. What they are, they have flat edges. You can check on the frets to make sure they don't rock so you don't have any high frets. So you set it on 3 frets and try to rock it. And like right here, it doesn't rock at all. So I know that in reference to these frets, this fret is not high. If this fret was high in reference to these, I would have some rock in it. So then I go through and I just test it across the fret on all of the frets. And this is actually looking very good. Now when I get up here to the smaller spacings, I may have to change the side that I'm using because I start overlapping. So I'll change to the thinner side. Up here, I actually don't have anything small enough, but thus far has been basically perfect. So I'm fairly confident in those frets are flat enough that there's not going to be any issue. They were really good. The one thing I am noticing is on this last fret, I don't know how well you can see it, but this last fret has been flattened. There's a flat top. All of the others have this nice round to them, but this last one is kind of flat on top, which makes me think it was probably high and just spot fixed to be not an issue. So we're going to go ahead and fix that, put that back into round. Most of the time I can't imagine this is an issue for most people. It's really only a cosmetic issue. It's not like you're going to be playing this fret up here, but I am going to go ahead and crown this back over. So I've got my crowning file out, and this is the smallest crown file that I have. These come in different sizes as inserts. Now there are like 100 different types of crowning files. Any of them will do just fine for this job. This is the kind that I use the most often, so this is the kind I'm most comfortable with. Some people like their triangle files for rounding. I do think that for beginners, there's a lot more opportunity to introduce some problems when you just have a triangle file. The goal here is to not take anything off the top and just put the sides basically back into round. So I'm putting just that peak right back in there, whereas it was flat, I'm putting a peak back in. That's looking significantly better with just that little bit. And I'm not going to take it a whole lot further because, like I said, it wasn't really a problem. It's just a cosmetic issue. I'm happy with that. Now the next thing I will do is, you can probably see here, these fret ends are fairly pointed on this end. I can round these over so that as you move up and down the fretboard, you're not going to hit those edges. I've got a round over file specifically for this. You can probably see here, this side is a safe edge and the actual sides are the file. You can put the safe edge against the fingerboard and just start to work those corners off. This is not a super hard process. This is definitely one of the easier ones to just take through here and do a quick pass over. And you really just need to round those edges. You don't have to take off a huge amount, and you'll notice a difference when you're playing. Now, of course, I'm starting in the area that you'll notice the least difference because it's very unlikely you get your hand all the way up here. But this is where we were zoomed in, so I started where you could see. I'll go ahead and finish that up and then bring you right back. Now, you do not need the specialized file for this job. All you need is a file that's fairly fine, that has a safe edge, and you can knock those off really easily. I also know that a lot of guys like to just take some sandpaper, like 600, and just run it like this, and that will dull those edges, and that is 100% correct. It will do that. I like the file a little bit more just because it takes off a little bit more. It really shapes them into less of a sharp shape. So I like the file just a little bit more, but the sandpaper works almost as well as it is. So we're done with that now. Those are feeling a lot better on the ends. I am going to now polish these frets as I have filed on this one and on the edges of all of them. I start to work in some rough spots. So we'll now polish them. I really only like doing a dry polish with sanding pads. There are many other ways that you can go around about polishing these frets. I'll probably just take some higher grit sandpaper type things. So I'm going to start off with some 600, and I am going to run along the edges where I filed, and then do the tops just real quick, real light. Now we'll do some 1200 and maybe push a little bit harder, get a little bit better polish going. And now I'm going to use these micro polishing pads. I've got them labeled 1 through, I think it's 6. Yeah, 1 through 6. So they're basically just the same deal as the sandpaper. They just go up to a much higher grit to get a much nicer shine. I am not going to run all the way through these like I usually do for guitars. The mandolins really don't need the high polish that a guitar has. You're not bending strings at all because of the courses, so you really will not notice the difference between if I were to stop even like right here and then a high polish on a guitar. You wouldn't notice that these are any worse, or really you wouldn't notice any difference. Now I know some people like to use steel wool to polish frets, and that does work. However, I kind of like to have one thing to use for any frets, any fret polishing. So I use these for everything, whether it's mandolins, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, whatever. I would not use steel wool on an electric guitar ever, because steel wool lets off so much of that, so much of the pieces, and they are magnetic, and they will get stuck in the guitar pickups if you're not careful. Even if you are careful, they can get in there. And you'll never get them out. So I really can't recommend using steel wool for electric guitars. Now, acoustic instruments, obviously you can use it, and you can clean that stuff up with a magnet. But I like to have one thing that I use, across the board. And these work well for me. That way I don't have to have so many things around, and go, oh, well, I'm doing this, so I have to that. Anyway, I'm just going to do one more, and then I'm going to stop here. This is very good as it is. You can see they're shiny again. As I move my hand across, the reflections are there. And they don't need to be any more than this, really. Alright, now we're going to oil the board. So, as per usual, I'm going to be using the Be Good wood oil. I like this stuff. Just put a small amount on there, and then I just rub it in with my fingers. Now, I don't know what kind of cheapy wood they use for this. It's supposed to imitate either an ebony or a rosewood. What's kind of funny is it's really dark, but it's also fairly brown, so I don't know which one they're trying to imitate or just somewhere in between. But it looks alright. It looks a lot better when you oil it up. Condition it. I'll take a clean cloth and wipe off the excess. That is the fingerboard in good shape. So I also brought over a paintbrush for dusting, especially up on this headstock. Because I'm not taking these strings off here, it's kind of hard to get into all these places, but the paintbrush actually does a pretty good job. So there's another little tip. If you got a dusty headstock, you can just get a paintbrush and it cleans it up pretty good. It may not be perfect, but it's better than it was. I don't have any issues with these tuners. They actually seem to be tuning just fine. If you did, you could obviously oil the gears and help them turn a little bit better if you're having some binding issues. I'm not really having any issues. They're not loose by any means, so I'm just going to leave those as they are. I am going to clean up the body a little bit while I've got the strings loose and the bridge off of it. This piece over the tailpiece just is friction fit, so it just comes off, so I can set it aside. It's pretty dirty. I don't know how well you can see it. You probably can't. I can't see it very well, but it's dirty and dusty. I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit, and then I'll bring it back, and we can start working on the next little bit of actual setup stuff. So I got the body of the mandolin cleaned up pretty good. I'm going to work on the bridge now for a little bit, and more specifically the saddle. You can see here that this is not ebony. It's well, let's see, it's brown. I'm not sure what it is, but it's obviously not ebony. It's just been dyed black. You could probably get it off doing a lot better with another saddle. The thing is, though, your bridge really needs to be replaced too if you're going to upgrade. I'm not going to bother right now on such a cheap instrument. I think it makes very little difference at this point. So I am just going to try to make some slight improvements to this. The edges are a little sharp, so I'm going to take my little file here and just round them over. I probably rest my hand on this more than I should, but by rounding them, all these edges over, it becomes a lot more comfortable this way. There's a lot less sharp edges now. I have shaped a few mandolin saddles in my time. So, there's just a couple of spots. It's mostly these edges that you really want them to be round, so, you're hitting your hand or you're running your hand across them. You want it to be comfortable. You don't want to hit any sharp corners. That's a vast improvement right there over this side. They're very soft edges when I'm done with them, and I don't know, some people may not like that cosmetic choice, that they're such rounded edges, but it's so much more comfortable. You're seeing, you can see right where I've taken it all off, and I haven't adjusted haven't touched the playing portion yet, the intonation part at all, which is important because you really don't want to adjust that in any way. Those are set right where they need to be. But you can round the edges off quite a bit more than they usually come. So now you can see where I've taken all this off, and it is a vast improvement over the way it was. They feel way better. I'm going to dye this black again. I'll have to get out the black dye and dunk this in it probably just to make sure it's all nice solid black. But that is going to affect your playability, the way it feels to play, quite a bit more than it would seem, and it really doesn't take much to knock those corners rounded. I'll go ahead and take care of making this black again, and then we will move on. So we're back to black now. You can see I got some of it on me, but that's pretty much standard for when you're messing with dyes. What you got to do when you're starting to mess with these things is make sure you're putting the saddle back in the right way. The high E string should be the furthest one forward. That is generally how they go. It's intonated that way intentionally. Now I'm going to stick this back in here. I did raise this up to make sure that we got plenty of room because it was too low and now it's probably going to be too high, but that's okay. It's really easy to adjust with the thumb wheels. Now what I checked real quick there was that the feet are actually making good contact on the mandolin top, and they are, but if they weren't making good contact, like there was a gap or something in here, what you could do very easily would be take a piece of sandpaper, put it with the rough side up underneath the bridge, then move the bridge just a little bit back and forth to slowly make the feet of the bridge the same shape as the top. This one seems to fit fairly well. These cheap ones, it's really, you're going to be lucky if you're going to find one that fits as well as this one seems to. I have gone ahead and stuck a piece of its neoprene underneath the strings on the tailpiece here. You could use a piece of cloth or anything kind of soft to help mute these strings behind the bridge. I am going to go ahead and stick another piece on top actually and sandwich it in there. This is just a little piece that I cut off from one of the aluminum can holders that they have for drinks. I just cut one up and used a little piece. Now I'm moving these strings back to where they need to be, but you need to make sure that you're moving the right string. I think that's it. So we're back on there. Now there are about 3 things I can think of to start thinking about as we get going from here. String height is a thing to be thinking about just constantly because, it's such an important part of what's going on here. The other thing is this bridge needs to be intonated now, which will require me to maybe move it back and forward just a little, up, depending on where it intonates. And I'll have to tune it up to see that. We'll have to tune it up to see string height as well, because that will add the tension to it. And the other thing to think about will be height off the nut. You're going to want to make sure that it's not too super high off the nut. Now, the string height at the nut and the string height at the 12th fret will both be measured by using some kind of feeler gauge. Basically, I have a pick for the 12th fret and I have a pick for the 1st fret. Now, those are measuring, this one measures about, at the 12th fret, my feeler gauge measures about 45 thousandths of an inch, or about 47 thousandths of an inch. And that's about 1.21 millimeters. So that's about what I want my string height to be at the 12th fret. Obviously, I'll want the bass string a little looser and the treble string could be a little tighter of a fit there because the treble string will be a little lower and the bass string needs to be a little higher. So that's basically one gauge that I'll use about the 12th fret. The 1st fret will be about 17 thousandths or about 0.42 millimeters. Once again, those, you'll want the bass string to fit a little looser and the treble string to fit a little tighter because they can be a little closer to that. So those are about what you want for string height measurements. It really helps if you just make some feeler gauges or picks. Usually the really cheap thin ones come about 17 thousandths, so they work really good for this. This top one I had to glue two together, but I made about the right size so I can measure for that. I'm going to go ahead and tune this up now, I guess, so we can get an idea where it's at. I won't bother doing that on camera. I'll get that done and I'll bring you back and we'll start looking at the string height. So we are now up to pitch. We can now start to check the string height, and I'm going to do that before I check the intonation because all of these things really affect each other. You can probably see this is very loose in here. So these strings can probably come down a little bit. I think the string height at the nut is fairly good. Yeah, you can see that pick. It holds it in there, and that's good. But this one for the 12th, it's very loose. So the strings can come down, which is good. It's easy. All I have to do is loosen these thumb screws here. And the bridge comes down. Now it is going to play with my tuning a little bit. But I'm going to do a quick check here. Look at that. So that's getting close. We can come down maybe a hair more. And more on the bass side than the treble. So we'll stick that back in there. That's doing pretty good. I'm going to check the tuning and then we'll check it again. I'm going to see if I can do this way. Alright, so we're back up to pitch now, so I'll slide this back in there. I think that's pretty good. You see, it doesn't let loose of that pick, so that means that it's holding it in there, and it's not so tight that I can't get it back out. Which means the string head is probably, you know, it's maybe a little higher than this, but obviously it's not snug to this. So that's looking really good. Now the thing we need to do is check the intonation, which is why I've now turned the tuner around here. And so what we'll do is, you know, we're making sure we're up to pitch. And then we're hitting it at the 12th fret. You can see we're crazy flat, which means the bridge is too far back. So that bridge needs to come forward. We'll check the high E as well. Crazy flat. So we'll bring that forward. If you're careful, you can do this while you're up to pitch. Now I have to retune this now that I moved the bridge. Alright, so we're back up to pitch. Now we'll do basically the same thing again. Hit the G string, hit it at the 12th. We're still a little flat. We'll check the high E string. Quite a bit flat. So flat means the bridge is too far back. We have to move it forward some more. See that? Right where it should be. That G is just a little bit sharp. So I'll try to keep the E where it is and pivot the G back. It has the same float open as it does at the 12. Which means it settles on that note perfectly. So it's intonated pretty much as well as I can get it. And those outside strings are all you can really do. I mean, you could get fine adjusting in there with a file and reshaping this, but on a cheaper instrument like this, it's really not worth your time. Which means that this thing is pretty much done. I'm just noticing a couple of flakes of dust still maybe left. But this thing is now going to be playing way better than it was throughout. So what I'll do is I'll go get set up and I'll play this just a little bit. I'm not a real good mandolin player, but I can play what I can, and we'll finish up with this mandolin. Well, I think this thing turned out really good. It's definitely playing better than it's ever played, and it's probably playing better than most of, the ones that came out of this factory. Probably 99.999% of the ones that came out of this factory. But I'm really happy with it, and I think the point came across really well. For just a couple of things you can do if you've got an instrument like this, because a lot of people have instruments like this, that it really could use some setup, but it doesn't make a lot of money sense to take it to someone to have everything it needs to have done. So, just a few things that maybe you can do yourself to save a little money and get a cheap instrument playing enough that you can, be learning on it and be playing it rather than it fighting you the whole way. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.